Chapter 124. There was something very unique about the timeline you were once a part of, said OJ. There's something very unique about the memories you have because of that. Not just that memory of Simon Collins, but other memories too. Things long buried within your psyche. Things you probably have no conscious recollection of. But somewhere within you, they are there. And this is the reason you were selected to write this book. OJ looked at me intently for a while, presumably to give me time for it to sink in. The reason why they had chosen me, and why, according to them, I myself had chosen this path. So not for my voice, my writing style, the way I type, I said hopefully. Afraid not, said OJ, more cheerfully than I would have hoped. But why didn't you just tell me all this stuff in the beginning? Why the charade of the whole book plot and AC masquerading as some sort of half-wit and, say what? Said AC, and you pretending to be a prisoner and wanting to get this terrible, bizarre thing off your chest that you haven't even done, and... Marlon, said OJ, with infinite patience and using my actual name for once. Would you have believed us if we'd hit you with this whole thing from the start? I thought about it for a second. Probably, I said, especially if you'd shown me all this. AC and OJ looked at one another and frowned. Oh, OJ said, then I guess we wasted our time. We had this idea that we needed to lure you in bit by bit, that your skepticism would be eroded a little at a time, and that your belief would likewise grow slowly, a little more the deeper and deeper you got. The writing, the visions, the hike, the Peacock Ranch, even meeting the general and starting at Area 51 rather than coming straight here. It was all carefully plotted and schemed over the course of many years, with hundreds of people working on it, all to bring us to this moment now. And you're saying we could have just told you the whole thing from the outset, and you'd have been like, sure, no problem, let's do it. I nodded easily. Damn, said AC. All that driving I did, all the way from Vancouver and back down again, all for nothing. Except at least we got to eat that all-you-can-eat sushi. I shrugged my shoulders. Sorry, guys, I said, but yeah, I'd have totally been up for it. I didn't have much better going on. I don't think it would have needed much to convince me. I felt bad for them. Here they were, meticulously planning the entire course of human history, and yet they'd gone barking up the wrong tree thinking I'd have needed talking into a caper like this. Still, I'd gotten some words out of it, and met Rachel, and had a nice time seeing the sights on the road. Also, that hike was something I'd been wanting to do for years, so I guess I'd gotten that monkey off my back. And as AC had mentioned, that all-you-can-eat sushi was worth going out of the way for. Plus, I'd seen George Clooney in the flesh, God rest his soul, and had a pretty fascinating time at the Peacock Ranch. So maybe it wasn't all futile, this strange journey to here, a bit more interesting than just jetting straight from Leeds to Area 66.6, the journey being more important than the destination and all that. Still, said AC, pacing away from me and rubbing his chin, there is perhaps one thing that you're not considering. Yeah, said OJ, a smile spreading across his face. Good point, AC. That's right, old buddy, said AC, turning around and smiling too. You know my goddamn name. He strode back over to the computer and began deftly flicking the mouse this way and that, a click here and a click there, changing the date to some point years ahead of us, and then back to Wikipedia. The thing you're forgetting, said AC, is that we know the future, all possible futures, and that, as you've seen, even tiny little changes in events and circumstances can have enormous repercussions for the entire direction of the planet. And when I say direction, I mean that quite literally. It's the butterfly effect, said OJ. That's not just a fanciful concept. It's a truth more real than almost anyone can imagine. Here, said AC, is the Wikipedia entry for Marlon Bundo, given our current timeline and trajectory. I read it. It was just an entry for that same old goddamn rabbit, but this time there was a line at the top of the page that made my heart flutter. This article is about the American rabbit, For the British author, see Marlon Bundo, and in brackets, author. And here, he said, giving me no time to click on what was presumably me, is the timeline if you hadn't met Rachel, and if you don't write this book exactly as it is, and if any little thing that you currently remember had been different. There's nothing there, I said, staring at a black screen. Exactly, said OJ. No internet, no web of any sort, no nothing. I stared some more. Why was this black screen so compelling? It was no different to a monitor that was simply turned off, yet it represented something much, much more than that. Was it the same energy that compelled people to look at a total lunar eclipse and gaze at where the moon wasn't, when they could do that pretty much any time? No internet, I said, and shuddered. No nothing, OJ reiterated. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Probably they were pulling my leg and trying to get another one over on me. But what if they weren't? What if... This is important, said OJ. Every little thing. And yet, it's not something you have to worry about. It's all taken care of. It's arranged. The only thing we have to do is the thing we have to do. Do our duty, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, no matter what it calls you to do. AC began moving the mouse again and put the date a few more years into the future. Tomorrow, he said, is September the 1st. A special window opens up on that day, and if we don't act, it'll be the end of everything. The dark forces have been planning something, a major shift in timelines, and if we can stop them, they should be defeated once and for all. And this is where you and the memories you're carrying come in. No pressure then, I said. No pressure whatsoever, said OJ, grinning at me. How can you fail when it's already written? This is as confusing as the time travel plot from Terminator, I said. From what? Said AC. From the movie. No time for that, OJ said, glancing at AC. Let's get on with the big reveal. OJ leaned over and typed some words in the search box. Every time he did that, I had to scooch over towards AC, and still I had his shoulder and head in my face. I wondered why they'd put me in the middle when they hadn't even let me touch the keyboard or mouse and were doing everything for me. Surely I'd have been better off standing to the side and letting one of them sit in the hot seat and work the whole thing. But then, maybe if we'd done that, the sun would have exploded, or some gigantic butterfly would have woken from the ocean's depths and taken over the world or something. So I figured there was a reason in it, no matter how annoying this constant buffering was becoming. Here, said OJ, is the Wikipedia for the timeline where 9/11 didn't happen, where the hijackers were apprehended before they boarded those 4 planes, where the FBI acted on the information they had, and where the Twin Towers didn't fall. As you can see, said AC, it ain't a pretty sight. Feel free to have a click around and confirm it for yourself. Finally, I thought, I get to put my hands on the mouse and explore a bit myself. Been way too long since I've gotten my mouse-powered dopamine injections, and since my eyeballs had flitted from page to page of useless information I would almost immediately forget. I typed in the search box. I clicked from entry to entry. I scanned and perused and sat flabbergasted and open-mouthed, overwhelmed by the sheer horrible difference the absence of this one seemingly terrible event had made in such a short span of time. No, I said, time and time again. That's terrible. That's horrible. That can't be. Tears fell from my eyes. The devastation, the tragedies, the unspeakable horror committed by man upon man, woman upon woman, child upon child. The brutal experience that life had become for almost everyone but a select few. The darkness that had fallen upon the earth. So without 9/11, I said, Trump doesn't get to become president, and though in the short term Bernie Sanders seems a million times better, within a decade we almost literally have hell on earth. That about sums it up, said AC, though it's slightly more than almost literally. That's pretty much exactly what we'll have, though, alas, none of us will be around to see it. Old age, I said. AC shook his head. You think people like us would be allowed to exist, knowing what we know? Even people like you? Think again. I stared back at the screen, clicked a few more times, tried to get some football results from just in the future. Said OJ, hitting Alt and F4. That would be really bad if you did that. Plus, you're on the wrong timeline anyway, so it wouldn't work. Except to have repercussions nobody wants to see. You think what you just looked at was bad. Would have been even worse if you'd placed some faulty bets and lost all your savings in a few weeks' time. That's why, said AC, despite the free rein you've been given with everything we've shared with you so far, we simply cannot permit you to share what you've seen of the future from any of the timelines, beyond the bit about Trump and Sanders. If you've ever watched a time travel movie, you know how important that is. We've trusted you with this. Can we trust you to keep all your knowledge of what's to come a secret for the rest of your days? I thought about it. I knew myself. I shook my head. In all honesty, I said, I don't see how I could go even 6 months without blabbing about what I've just seen, without posting it on Facebook, without telling someone I end up sitting next to on a bus or train. We figured that, said OJ, so we've taken precautions. On the one hand, there's the carrot, that there are and will be a small number of people you can talk to about all this, if you ever feel the need. And on the other hand, there's the stick, the small implant that you have in the back of your neck that will sever your spinal column the moment you begin to open your mouth to the wrong person. And don't even think about trying to have it removed. That, too, will make it explode. Tentatively, I reached my hand behind my head and felt around. Sure enough, what felt like a tiny scab for a cut or incision I had no memory of experiencing. But when, I said, at the motel in Boise, on the drive? Hey, see you bastard, what the fuck? I thought we were... Hey, he said, holding up his palms in innocent protest and shaking his head. Nothing to do with me. But you gotta understand, it's for the best. All you have to do is keep it to yourself. And believe you me, when you find out who you can share it with, you won't give a damn about having some little bomb implanted in your spine. But as far as this is concerned, we can't take any chances. You don't want to know the results of you shooting your mouth off to the wrong person on the wrong train at the wrong time. Or maybe he does, said OJ, leaning over and pushing his breast into my face once again. Type, type, type. Click, click, click. And there I was, staring at the consequences of the foolish actions of some future alternative version of me. Yikes, I said, and I was convinced. Chapter 125. They led me to a windowless suite straight out of the 70s and told me to get some sleep. I didn't need no second invitation. It was by now the wee hours back in England, where part of my body and my brain still were, perhaps trying desperately to purchase a ticket so as to catch me up, or making their way to me via ocean liner, and I was amazed that I'd managed to stay awake so long, given how tired I'd been at the Peacock Ranch and after leaving OJ's cell. I lay in the bed and contemplated the events of the day. It was the kind of day I hadn't had since I was a hitchhiking youth, waking up in one town and going to sleep somewhere entirely different, a dozen different conversations with such wildly different people, stretched over hundreds of miles ranging from the deserts to the mountains to the plains. Days like those, when I looked back on them as I cuddled up in my sleeping bag and my tent, they seemed like weeks or months, the sheer number of experiences and variety of weather and terrain I'd crammed into those 16 to 20 waking hours. But this day seemed like it had encompassed several lifetimes, and the reality that I had woken up in a motel in Boise with a guy I'd thought of as nothing more than a simpleton, ex-American footballer, probably suffering from the ill effects of too many concussions, seemed about the most far-fetched thing I could think of, which, given what had transpired since our visit to the Peacock Ranch, was quite some claim. I liked it, though. It tickled me. And the last thing I remembered as I drifted into a satisfied sleep was the smile on my face and the life-affirming thought, I'm glad I'm where I am. It was a thought I'd once vowed to always fall asleep to. But as youth had faded and so-called real life had taken over, it was a thought that had arisen less and less frequently. And now it was back, and in quite some style. and not only that, but it was accompanied by no small measure of excitement and intrigue as to what the following day would bring, not to mention the days and years to come. Chapter 126. I would say I slept like a log, but I'm pretty sure logs don't sleep, and even if they do, I have no possible way of knowing what their state of consciousness is like in order to draw a comparison. Furthermore, I didn't even really know how I'd slept, given that I'd been asleep, so perhaps it's best just to stick with the facts. I slept for like 10 hours. I only woke up twice to pee. I felt good when I woke up, and the mattress was just right, so no pains in my back or my neck, aside from the small tingle where the miniature bomb was ticking away. I tried the door, but the door was locked, so I took a shower and spent an interesting 5 minutes rifling through the bathroom cabinet and pocketing a few containers. Then I stepped back into the main room and saw a pretty woman of about 33 sitting in a chair in a corner. "Rachel," I said, "what are you doing here?" I rushed over to give her a hug, but she held up her hand to stop me. How does she talk? Doesn't matter, does it? Fucking Israeli as well. Come on. It doesn't matter. Marlon, she said. "There's no time to explain." She talks like me. "Just get dressed as quick as you can and meet me in the corridor." And with that, she whirled around and departed through the door, leaving me standing there in just my socks. I pulled on my clothes and couldn't help but worry that something had gone amiss. This Rachel, after all, was someone I thought I could trust, if feelings were anything to go by. But what if they weren't? What if I was merely being blinded by my lust, by her eyes, by the memory of her 2 plump breasts pushed firmly into my back, by her hair, by her smile, by her fingers, by the way she... Or, wait, hadn't she warned me about OJ, and, by extension, about AC? What did she know about them and about their plans for me? Was she actually a Mossad spy? Or something similar but worse? And how had she found her way here, when the last time I'd seen her she'd been DJing in an underground mansion, many armed guards from wherever the hell we were? I looked around the 70s-ness of the suite, and for one moment had the awful sensation that I was actually some dude alive in 1973, and that the whole thing was merely some weird drug trip. I took a look in the mirror, though, and where I might have expected a big bushy moustache and a medallion and shades, I found nothing but my own 2017-looking face and a fairly typical beard of the time. My clothes, too, though far from fashionable, were at least from the 90s, and so that possibility was crossed off the list. In a nutshell, I couldn't figure out what was going on, and I guessed there was only one way to find out. I put on my shoes. I did up the laces. I looked one last time around the room. I felt in my back pocket for the tea bags. I farted. I waited a few seconds to ensure that it didn't smell or follow me, and then I put my hand on the door and, with a deep breath, pushed it open, and... "Surprise!" came a cry of voices from the corridor. All around me was smiling faces in silly little party hats, party poppers and balloons, and those things you blow on where the paper snake unfurls and it sounds like a kazoo. Of course, it suddenly dawned on me. It's my birthday. In all the excitement, I'd completely forgotten. But somehow these guys had remembered. OJ was there, AC was there, the General was there, even Major Tom was there, and nestled amongst a gaggle of bobbing balloons with the number 42 written on them, Rachel's smiling face and mass of Jewish curls. She walked up to me. She grabbed my face with 2 strong hands. She planted a quick kiss on my lips and then gave me the joint second biggest hug of my life. "Happy birthday, Marlon," she whispered in my ear. "I hope you have a memorable one." And then, one by one, the guys shook my hand and patted me on the back and wished me all the best. And wow, it sure was a giddy and weird start to the day. Whatever next? Chapter 127. All together, we walked to some sort of dining room where plates of eggs and toast and hash browns and veggie sausages were piled on the table. At the stove, a man with his back to us hummed contentedly as he flipped fried eggs and listened to the radio. He had a chef's hat on and wore a blue and white striped apron, so I figured they did allow some manual workers down here after all. That was when I noticed everyone except myself was wearing blue coveralls and looking like they were on their way to unblock a sewer or fix a malfunctioning elevator. I felt a bit jealous, to be honest. It was a good look, and Rachel looked especially good in hers. But soon enough, AC was there to present me with my own outfit, all neatly folded and with my initials embroidered on them. "Happy birthday, Limey," he said. "And this time they're all yours. Ain't no Michael Bublé or Matthew Broderick gonna come claiming that." I looked at them fondly and stroked the white stitched letters. "Broderick too, huh?" I said. "No wonder you wouldn't let me keep it. I hear he goes mental if anything of his goes missing." "Like you wouldn't believe," AC said. "He's a smasher, and I ain't just talking cups." Everybody laughed, probably some Peacock Ranch joke I wasn't privy to. But there'd be plenty of time to find out, I supposed, once Rachel and I were married and I got her all to myself. Man, I couldn't take my eyes off her. She looked so good in that boiler suit, not a million miles from how she must have looked in her Israeli army uniform. Sling an AK-47 across her back, and I'd have been halfway to orgasm right there and then. But, alas, there were sloppy eggs to eat and toasts to butter. It wasn't the time for those kinds of shenanigans. We all started tucking in, and the guy at the stove dropped a couple more fried eggs in front of me. "Over easy, right?" he drawled in an adorable southern accent, "if I remember rightly." I looked up at his smiling mug, a man of about 65 with slightly sticky-out ears and goofy bright eyes. He looked like the class clown with those ears and that chef's hat and the apron, but also something strangely familiar about his face. "Marlon," said OJ. "This is George. George, meet Marlon." George popped his flipper back into the pan and stuck out his hand. "It's an honor to meet you," he said. "The boys here done told me plenty of tales of what you guys been up to, and what you gonna do, too. Hot damn, I can hardly wait." "You're George Bush," I said, slowly and open-mouthed, losing a bit of egg along the way. "Well, I hope so," he said, pointing out the initials on his chest. "Otherwise, my wife was in bed with some other guy last night." He laughed at a joke that maybe made sense in Texas, but I'm not quite sure did in my head, then turned back to his griddle and his radio and resumed to humming once more. I leaned over the table and whispered to OJ and AC, "What's he doing here?" But all they did was nod and wink their eyes, as if to say, "Not to worry, Limey, it's all good, and you'll be finding out soon enough. Just sit back and enjoy your breakfast. After all, George fries up a mean egg, does he not?" And I had to admit, taking a bite of a beautifully runny yolk, he did. Eggs and toasts were everywhere, everybody piling in, and George stacking more and more on the table. I looked at a teapot. I noticed AC nod his head at me. I gave it a pour and took a sniff. "Jasmine green tea," I said. AC nodded. "Loose leaf, too," he said. "Happy birthday again. Though you got Rachel here to thank for that one. While we were partying last night at OJ's, she drove all the way to Vegas to pick some up at a Chinese grocery store. Not easy to find round these parts. But when we told her it was your special day, she insisted on it." I looked at her smiling demurely and felt my heart beat double time in my chest. Fuck me, what a woman. And it was everything I could do to keep myself from leaping over the table at her and slurping at her face. But first, some questions, like, "So I guess," said OJ, "you're probably wondering why Rachel's here, especially given some of the things she said to you back at the Peacock Ranch." I nodded my head, impressed once again with the synchronicity of his words, coming, as they had, apropos of nothing save the thoughts I was currently having in the privacy of my own head. "I am," I said, "though I'm pretty sure there's a perfectly rational explanation." "Of course," OJ smiled, "and more than one. Not only has she been working with us the whole time, and, as I'm sure you've realized, her warning to you about us was nothing more than a test of faith. After all, It's easy to trust someone when everyone you respect is telling you to, but much more challenging and beneficial when you're choosing to believe what your own heart is telling you, despite what others may say. But beyond that, well, you see, talking of birthdays, as we were, AC took over. Can you guess when Rachel's is? I looked at her joyful expression like the shining sun, which could indicate that she was a Leo. But no, Leos always have to be the center of attention. I didn't think Rachel was like that. Could she be an Aquarius? But she didn't seem particularly quirky or aloof or emotionally devoid or strange. Maybe a Virgo like me. But I'd say she was more confident than your average virgin, and not so shy either. Definitely not a Pisces, and probably not a Taurus too. Tauruses, such assholes, so stubborn and blinkered. Nor would I have thought her a Libra or Gemini or Sagittarius. Sag talk way more than she does. What did that even leave? I could never remember them all. And then it came. Of course, she was a Scorpio. She was sexy and hot, and probably had a delicious, exquisite sting in her tail. Though I couldn't for the life of me remember what month Scorpio straddles. Maybe October, November, so maybe around Halloween. Maybe Halloween itself, because for sure something about her had bewitched me and put me under her spell. So that felt like a good date, and now all I needed was the year. "Time's up," said AC, having been more than generous with how long he'd given me to guess something pretty much unguessable, while the rest of the table waited and wondered what the hell was going on in my head. "Okay," I said, "I'm gonna go for October the 31st, 1980... And here I added a few years, just to be on the safe side, even though she'd already told me exactly how old she was when we'd first met. 87. "You think I'm 29, she said in somebody else's accent. "You think I'm 29, she said, smiling at me. "That's very sweet. Though even sweeter would have been you remembering that I'd already told you my age when we were in the room together at the ranch." Damn, I thought. Why does it always backfire when I try to dishonestly and cheesily flatter someone? Honesty really is the best policy, especially when you're dealing with the zero bullshit radar of a no-nonsense Israeli army chick like Rachel. Instead of getting all ashamed and tongue-tied, though, I decided to try a different tack and laugh too. "I knew that," I said, "but, you know, my old granddad made me promise that whenever I had to guess a woman's age, I was always knocked 3 or 4 years off, and a promise is a promise, especially when one's old granddad is concerned." I smiled at her, and judging by the smile I got back, it looked like my made-up story about a made-up promise I'd made to my once real but now dead granddad had saved the day. "Well," said AC, "aside from the shenanigans with the year, you were only about 6 months out, which is, of course, as far away as possible to be." AC and OJ and Major, Tom and the General laughed, but I was like, the laugh's going to be on you, and the egg on your faces when you realize I could have been 7 or 8, or even 9 months out, or... Oh, I thought, I get it now. And I sheepishly shoveled some fried egg into my own face, hoping beyond hope that OJ hadn't read those thoughts. I snuck a glance at him over my fork, and, from the glint in his eye, it appeared that he had. But the wink he gave me told me he wasn't going to say anything, not in front of Rachel. Good old OJ. I finished swallowing my egg and turned back to Rachel. "So you're a Gemini," I said. "Taurus," she stated plainly. "Taurus the bull." "May the 19th I was born, in Tel Aviv. May the 19th. 1984, I said slowly, open-mouthed. "You mean..." "Marlon," OJ said. "I'd like you to meet the only other person in the world who has lived the exact same timeline as you. But now you see, there's a very good reason why she wasn't watching that soccer game of yours. She was only a couple of hours old when it ended. Plus, living in Israel. Plus, she's a girl. And..." "Hey," said Rachel, "I like soccer as much as anyone. I've played my whole life. I vice-captained Harvard's women team, so don't give me your..." OJ held up his hands in apology. "I'm sorry," he said. "Old habits die hard. Here in the U.S., nobody liked soccer when I was young. It was just some weird sport Hispanics played when nothing ever happened. So it's taken me some adjustment to get used to the idea that guys like it, never mind girls. We're old men, AC added sheepishly. 140 years between us, 70 years each. Born just 23 days and 5 miles apart, and together ever since. They looked at one another, and their unbreakable bond was obvious. Their lives were as destined to be interwoven and connected as Jesus's and John the Baptist's, both pairs of men simultaneously dwelling within their respective mothers' wombs, and having made the decision to journey to earth together so long ago, and in a dimension so far removed from this table, that only God, him or herself, could begin to tell the tale of it. So now that was 50% of the men in the room who had committed a faux pas in front of Rachel, and only Major Tom and the General and George the chef remained yet to make a dummy of themselves. And, speak of the devil, here comes George now to deliver one last load of food and sit himself down in the chair next to her. "How y'all enjoying them eggs?" he said, sounding for all the world like a Matthew McConaughey character, or Matthew McConaughey. "I laid 'em myself. Fresh this morning." He guffawed like some Texas hick and flashed his goofy grin at us. Funny how, like Hitler, I'd always been led to believe that George W. was a bit of a cock and an asshole, but now that he was up close and in the flesh, he just seemed like your average, funny, harmless, silly, bad joke-making, elderly white guy. Just like anybody's granddad or dad. The kind of man it was probably quite nice to be married to or have as a father. The kind of man you couldn't possibly hate were they not in the public eye or, for reasons that were always beyond me, compelled to pursue impossible and miserable jobs, such as president or prime minister or chief executive of Network Rail. "Yes, sir," he said to no one in particular, stacking his toast with a mess of eggs. "George fries 'em good, and when George fries 'em, they stayed fried. Look at these booties," he said, spooning a pile of hash browns onto his plate. "Crisp to perfection and coming home to daddy." He smacked his lips and shoveled a forkful into his mouth. He chewed loudly, opening and closing his mouth, and sent shivers down my spine. "Mouth, George," O.J. said, and George just giggled and said, "Oh, sorry, Pa," and carried on his chewing, more quietly now, looking like a child whose full concentration was needed in order to keep from slopping and slurping and dribbling at the table. What a funny little crew we had going on here, and judging by the empty plates and the empty chairs, as well as the considerable mountain of food still to get through, we were expecting a few additions to our number. Chapter 128. I went to the bathroom to change and take a shit. George's eggs and hash browns and toast seemed to have encouraged some movement, new supplies coming in and relieving the old guard and all that, and when I returned the table was a hive of activity. I sat down quietly as the conversation burbled and bubbled around me. Sat opposite me and next to the General, beautifully haired and saucily grinning, was the fine, MILF-like figure of Martha Stewart. And on the other side of her, Lieutenant Dan/Captain Kirk, somehow written back into existence, despite the fate I'd sent him to in that cramped buggy. To complete the trio of new arrivals, I was thinking maybe George Clooney. Not decapitated after all. But I suppose how well that would work would depend on which path you took through the choose-your-own-adventure section of the story, and how you feel about bringing previously deaded characters back to life. On the one hand, he's a likeable fellow, and it was a shame to see him reduced to 2 separate parts and no longer functional. But, on the other, I'm not sure I have the energy to write someone as effortlessly suave and charismatic as he is, or as I've repeatedly made him out to be. And so I think, on reflection, it's best to leave him as a blue-faced, stitched-on-head corpse lying on a cold steel mortuary slab somewhere in L.A., his grieving widows sobbing at his side, even as the condition of her dress reveals that she wasn't exactly honouring his memory to the best of her abilities in the minutes and hours that immediately followed his demise. Who else is there? The cop that AC shurikened to death in that dream I had lying on the floor of the Portaloo at the end of my hike? I like the idea of having someone with a moustache take a place among the group, for reasons I hope to make clear soon, but his reappearance just seems a little too weird, even for me. How about the couple that we talked to about bears, or Troy, the waiter at the sushi joint? He could be a candidate for sure, given that I'd mused about him being real or not, and even suspected that he was some sort of robot. But if we're going to go down that route, even better than him would be the little Japanese waitress who said, "Thank you," all the time, as some sort of love interest for AC. They would be like that cute couple in Moonraker, metal-toothed jaws, and that small blonde girl with the plaits and glasses and braces, and sick. Not sick and sick, but sick in square brackets after braces, for reasons that you may or may not be aware of. And they could slowly and clumsily and endearingly fall in love in the chapters that are to come. Did you know, by the way, that AC was 6'5"? And if we say this little Japanese waitress was around 5 feet tall, maybe less, that gives him a whopping 17 inches on her minimum. That's kind of sweet. There's lots of scope for her to be rescued and picked up by him. Or maybe it could be the other way round if we want to begin playing with expectations and venturing into surreality. Yeah, maybe there should be a little of that somewhere in the book. Plus the juxtaposition of her delicate little Asianness and his badass gigantic blackness is a striking and vivid image. All her quiet thank yous and humble bows colliding with him calling me fool and tutting his lips and talking like some character out of The Wire, the way he did in the beginning before things got serious and he was revealed to be a high-up official or spy of some kind, actually on a footing more or less equal with OJ, despite the charade of the hierarchical arrangement they'd hoodwinked us all with earlier in the book, and in real life too, breath. How would they make love, this unnamed Japanese girl, let's call her Tomoko, and her gentle giant soulmate, Al, you know my goddamn name, Cowlings? Well, I don't want to get too graphic. You can paint those images in your own head if you like. But I do find it one of the most fascinating quirks of life that, no matter how big the difference in height between two lovers, when they're having sex, their mouths will always meet. It's like the act bends space in much the same way a psychedelic drug or mystical experience or time machine bends time. Think about it. You see a couple where one is significantly taller than the other, and when they stand side by side, her lips may only come up to his sternum. Yet when he's on top of her, thrusting into her, filling her with ecstasy, not only are their genitals perfectly aligned, but their mouths are too. How it happens, I know not, but that it does, as millions can confirm, is beyond question. Suddenly, though, I am decided to confine their love to some other realm, some other point in space and time, some other story. For I know now who I need to bring to the table, and, really, the answer was obvious all along. I wonder if you can guess.